In what is some of the most morally repulsive news to come out of the coronavirus pandemic so far, we now have reports that a number of U.S. senators engaged in insider trading after receiving reports about how terrible the coronavirus pandemic was going to be. Guys, they dumped a whole bunch of stock after receiving this news, and then in the case of Richard Burr, turned around and told everybody, guys, nothing to see here. Don't worry. It's not going to be that bad. It's just going to pass. Richard Burr, Republican, going along with the narrative that Donald Trump was running with at the time, that, guys, it's just going to, it'll disappear. Just wait. Just you watch. It's going to disappear. So I want to go through this because it's actually a little bit of a different case for each congressperson. You could argue that in the case of Jim Inhofe and Dianne Feinstein, that it wasn't as bad as the case is for Kelly Loeffler and Richard Burr. But first, I want to show you this tweet from AOC, absolutely slamming Richard Burr. So let me make it bigger for you so you can see it. As Intel chairman, Senator Burr got private briefings about coronavirus weeks ago. Burr knew how bad it would be, and he told the truth to his wealthy donors while assuring the public that everything was going to be fine. Then he sold off $1.6 million of stock before the fall. He needs to resign. Completely on board, completely agree with AOC. And guys, it's not just the left who's slamming Richard Burr over this one. Tucker Carlson came out and said, look, Burr, if you need to come out and explain yourself, and if you don't have an adequate explanation, then you need to resign immediately. We're not going to defend this. And guys, that actually, I want to briefly say, that is a point of bravery from Tucker Carlson, because oftentimes in the media, it's just cheerleading for your side. Tucker Carlson to come out and hit Richard Burr, credit where credit is due. Now, I want to go through the individual cases here. So in the case of Jim Inhofe, you could argue that his instance wasn't as bad because he wasn't technically in the meeting, first of all, and he actually has been moving stock for the past number of years from stocks into mutual funds, likely because it's a safer bet. The guy's 85 years old. He's been doing this, for a long, long time. And the actual interval of, the move of the money looks like it was on a regular pattern. He needs to be investigated for sure, do an investigation just to make sure. But it definitely doesn't seem as bad as some of the other people. Now, in the case of Dianne Feinstein of California, her instance looks a little bit more sketchy than Jim Inhofe, but it maybe isn't. She needs to be investigated too. So her money is in a blind trust, and she also was not in the meeting, and her husband was the one who was involved with contacting the people involved in the blind trust that they want to move some money around. So, her instance, it needs to be investigated. It definitely sounds kind of sketchy because she's talking about a blind trust, but then she's also talking about her husband doing it. So it needs to be investigated for sure, but it isn't as bad as the next two people I'm going to tell you about. So in the case of Kelly Loeffler, she's a freshman Republican from Georgia, and she sold stock on the day of the meeting. And by the way, her husband is the CEO of the New York Stock Exchange, and so he was involved with some other stuff with his stuff as well. But she sold millions, $3 to $4 million, and she also turned around and bought stock, which is like a company involved in telecommuting and like working from home. Guys, she knew how bad it was going to be, and then so she dumps a whole bunch of stock, and then turns around and buys stock in a company which, yeah, you guessed it, is going up right now. Completely disgusting. But Richard Burr is probably the most morally repulsive. He's the one that most of the fire is being directed at right now because he liquidated his entire portfolio. In the case of Kelly Loeffler, she's worth like $500 million. So, $3 to $4 million, nothing to her. But guys, to be very, very clear, completely disgusting. She needs to resign too. But in the case of Richard Burr, he liquidates his entire portfolio of about 1.6, maybe up to $2 million. And he goes around, like AOC hit him for, he goes around telling his wealthy donors at a ritzy club, guys, this is going to be as bad as the Spanish flu. Multiple reports of that. He goes around telling his rich donors that this is going to be completely terrible. And then he writes an op-ed. He writes a literal op-ed saying, guys, this is not going to be bad. Because, guys, this was back when Donald Trump was still kind of saying that Donald Trump for a little bit there, you'll remember, was kind of like, don't worry about this. It's just going to, it'll disappear. It'll be gone very soon. But I mean, this really just shows you the complete disgustingness of all of Congress right now. Because for Richard Burr, I mean, it's sort of like the embodiment of it, the apotheosis of it, right? Because Richard Burr, who's his number one? He's supposed to be a public servant, but who's his number one? His number one is himself, his wallet, his own stock portfolio. Who's his number two? His wealthy donors, his wealthy campaign contributors, and his rich buddies at the club. Where's the American people on that list? They're not even number three. We're not even number three. We're A, B, C, D, E, F, Z. We're off the list. We're not even in his mental frame because he lies to us. He turned around and told us not to worry, not to panic, not to do anything to get ready. He lies to us while he's out here, watching himself, keeping his own back and protecting his wealthy campaign contributors, doing nothing for the American people. This so-called public servant, that's why we elect you guys. If you live in North Carolina, you need to vote against him, whether that's in a primary challenge if he refuses to step down, or in or in a general election. You need to vote against him because, guys, this isn't Republican or Democrat. This is just completely disgusting, and it needs to be called out wherever it exists. Because, in the case of Dianne Feinstein, if they run the investigation and it finds out that, look, what she was doing, she knew, I'm going to call her out too. I will make a video calling her out too. Because it's completely disgusting either way. And by the way, it was we have been seeing some good stuff. Tucker Carlson, like I was saying, Tucker Carlson calls him out saying, if this is true, you need to give your explanation and you need to step down because this is completely disgusting. So, I'm really happy to see people calling Richard Burr out. Now, I do want to be slightly fair to Richard Burr because he does have an explanation. So this is his statement. So let's take a look at his explanation. Let's let him defend himself. So he says, I relied solely on public news reports to guide my decision regarding the sale of stocks on February 13th. Specifically, I closely followed CNBC's daily health and science reports out of its Asia bureaus at the time, understanding the assumption many could make in hindsight. However, I did speak this morning with the chairman of the Senate Ethics Committee and asked him to open a complete review of the matter with full transparency. Now, look, credit where credit is due. Thank you for asking for an investigation of yourself. But I mean, come on. You got your news from CNBC. Look, remember what AOC said here? This is important. He is the chairman of the Intel Committee. The chairman. He had this information. So even pretending like, oh yeah, well, I got the information from the public news, but you still had the personal information which told you how bad it was going to be. Come on, man. Come on, Jack, as Joe Biden would put it. I mean, this is completely ridiculous. Again, credit to Tucker Carlson for calling out Richard Burr. Credit, of course, to AOC for also Tucker and Carlson and AOC uniting to call out corruption. I guess I don't know. Anyway, if you live in North Carolina, vote against Richard Burr. So anyway, if you like the video, I'd really appreciate it if you hit the like button and consider subscribing. Thanks.